How you
Nice.
doing, my friend?
I'm good, man. How you doing?
Oh, it's Friday afternoon. I get to see you. It makes my day. Got a marathon in about 9 days.
Oh, that's right. You're getting ready for that.
Yeah,
Right
I
off.
was getting ready for one when I saw you,
Oh, this
and
is the
now I'm
next.
doing another one. This is how I roll.
Hey, it's
Um, I ran
good goals, huh?
Mesa. Yeah, good life goals. I ran Mesa, Arizona. I got a personal best there, so I was psyched. That
Oh,
was
right on.
3:47.
Wow.
And Copenhagen's looking pretty good for another one. We'll see. At least that's what my pit numbers are telling me. But
Wow.
I'll just show up. It's freaking Copenhagen. You're right in the middle of the city, and they you basically do tourism while you're running.
Yeah. Well, dude, thank you for I'm glad we were able to connect.
Anytime.
Yeah, this has been such a interesting journey kind of learning about this and then just funny how life works because I was gobbling up your book and all of the amazing research for everyone listening. It's Sicker, Fatter, Poorer, the urgent threat of hormone disrupting chemicals to our health and future. And dude, it's like I think it's been about 6 months of ridiculous amount of research. I've hired researchers, and so I've have my own book part of like, and this theme is just everywhere. And it's like, okay, I thought it was in certain categories, maybe in personal care, maybe in the clothing, but then it's like in TV sets and couches and like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And just for the audience here, you and I, so we are our lines connected through Footprint, who we're a big fan of. They're the charging to get the single-use plastic faucet turned off in the world for better alternatives. So that's a thing. And so the last time we saw each other, we were in Phoenix,
Right.
and you gave a great talk on this topic. And so anyway, I just want to say, number one, thank you for the service that you've provided to illuminate and bring the invisible more visible. Because I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I was like, well, if you saw if you saw your shampoo with smoke coming out, you know what I mean? You could see it
You
and you're
would
like, oh
not
shit, I
use
don't want
it.
to put that on my body. But right? But it's invisible. And we're assuming that the products we buy are fine, are for our health, to make
Yep.
our, skin glow and, all of this stuff. So it's just utterly crazy. And I think you and I could probably speak for about a month on this topic pretty easily.
True.
So your incredible background, pediatrics, and then in the environmental health space, and then deep dive on the research and doing your own research and gobbling up the research, and kind of dedicating a huge part of your life to not only endocrine disrupting but other environmental issues that we're facing. Like, what like just a little bit on how did you get there, and
Yeah.
what were those moments that you kind of was like, we have a problem and I need to jump in here?
Sure. So it wasn't a straight and narrow path, that's for sure. I feel as though I tripped into the field of environmental health, let alone endocrine disruptors.
Yeah.
The story really begins when I applied to medical school. This was the era of the Clinton healthcare debate.
Mm.
And I kept getting these interview questions where people would say, well, what do you think of the Clinton healthcare plan? And I would say, at first, the trite things that you would say if you were interviewing for medical school and didn't want to insult some practitioner who was making mucho dollars, um, doing what she, or mostly he back then, and or she was doing. And at one point I stopped in the middle of an interview and when I got this question and asked the interviewer, well, help me understand, what do I learn about healthcare policy in your medical school?
So
Boy, that was
this was trying to get into medical school.
Yeah, I was just trying to get into medical school. Totally dumb move, because I don't think I got into that medical school. Because the question I asked was completely turning the tables.
Yeah.
But it made me realize, wow, I don't know anything about the policymaking process. So I decided to dig in further. I had gone straight from college to medical school, so I was young, and I could take a year off. So I took a year to go to the Kennedy School of Government. And boy, I had my head turned upside down just learning the world of healthcare policy and just policy in general. And I realized that there was more out there besides medical practice. So I got what you might call capital fever. I, decided to do my residency, because that's what you do when you're a doctor, to get your full certification, and finished my pediatric residency. Wonderful program, learned a ton, still wanted to be a pediatrician, but I was smitten with healthcare policy. So I decided to go work for then Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton. And I was told to work on children's and environmental health issues. And I figured I had the children's health part down, no problem. The environmental health part, I figured I would pick up as I go. Boy, was I in for a surprise. And I had my career transformed. I loved it. I ate it up. And I realized how much impact we needed to have in this space, because, as you said, what is invisible is assumed to be fine. So there's this notion I learned in medical school called only the dose makes the thing a poison. This by the Swiss philosopher Paracelsus. Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim's his name. And I love saying that because it's just so obnoxious. But the reason I love saying it too is that his notion lasted 500 years. You talk about something enduring 8 lifetimes after you, basically. This guy, sure, he self-experimented in all sorts of poisons, did all sorts of weird things to himself, which is what the physicians in that era did to themselves. But he made some fundamental notions that stood the test of time. So hats off to him. But one of the things I realized is that what little things do matter. And the basic notions underlying what I was taught in medical school were already unraveling by the time I was coming through. And we now have 500 or so scientific studies that tell us that not everything is drawn in straight lines, particularly when it comes to hormones in our bodies. We assume a little bit of everything is fine, everything in moderation. But what we know now is at that lowest levels of exposure, you can have the biggest effects of toxic chemicals in our daily lives. And it's not just chemicals in our shampoos, our personal care products, in electronics, furniture, aluminum can linings, thermal paper receipts, plastics. It's lead, mercury in fish, pesticides. All of these chemicals, we know that when you're down at the lowest levels, it's every little bit is that much more important. And then chemicals don't follow straight lines, because the hormones in our body behave differently, and different switches are turned on and off at different levels of exposure. I like to call it as a gas pedal and a brake. Sometimes you've actually pressed both the gas pedal and the brake, and the response drops, whereas before it had gone up and up and up. Suddenly it goes down because you started the brake, and then the gas, the pedal stops working, and then you have the response come back up over time. So it's a U-shaped exposure response function. The nerd way of saying it is non-monotonicity. But all this stuff means is you can't extrapolate the way we assumed was true from high dose experiments in animals to what low levels would do in people for the perspective of safety. So you have to imagine our whole scientific underpinning about what we assumed was okay for human health has just blown up. It's not only the dose makes the thing a poison, it's timing, it's other exposures, it's genetics, it's all of these other factors. So it was that kind of experience that really made me realize that I had a reckoning to have Um, and I had a unique contribution to make in helping us do the right thing for the general public.
Yeah, man. I mean, I am horrified. Like in my sliver. I don't know if I told you, but I don't need to get into an exhaustive aspect of this, but my father in the 90s was part of he worked on atomic bombs for the Navy, and he was in the Cuban Missile Crisis in that
Hmm.
blockade, and right, so they were playing with atomic bombs and getting ready, right?
Right.
So he was a unique class of Navy officers called the Keepers of the Dragon. Perfect name, right? But later in his life, his thyroid was gone, right?
Right.
He was toast, and so in the 90s, my dad, who was still a professor and was still doing stuff, right, and was
Right.
public, and he was to a point where any smell, any chemical, anything, it would just fog him out, right? He
Right.
couldn't function, and this was a highly functional person.
Right.
And then he was like, hey, if you're going to be around me, you got to use these fragrance free shampoos, and he set us up. So that was my first. And then once I started kind of having my own detoxification, which I was just going along with it because I didn't want to hurt my dad, I was like, I felt better. Like, and I wasn't super sensitive, but you realize, so that was my start. And then jumping into this book and consuming your book and all this freaking research that you've cited, and it's like, holy shit, the experimentation that we're doing without safety is just utterly horrifying from that perspective. So I love the fact that you're and I want to unpack this. People are going to be like, what the hell are they talking about? What are EDCs? What are these things? So
Yeah.
but I want to touch on all of these aspects because policy, environmental, 60 to 80,000 chemicals created every year, raining down on us in all kinds of ways. So what you were originally saying about dose, we have no freaking idea what we're doing with all of that exposure all the time under whatever conditions. So so why don't you break down what, I guess, in this context, what an endocrine disrupting chemical, and then we can start talking about where they show up.
Totally. So let's start with what endocrine means. Endocrine is hormones. Hormones are natural signaling molecules. They underlie every basic biological function from temperature, metabolism, salt, sugar, even sex. And when you're talking about endocrine disruption, you're talking about two things. You're talking about these hormones are natural molecules. Endocrine disruptors are synthetic molecules that are not made with the body's hormones in mind. And what they do is hack that signaling system and they run amok. And with these synthetic chemicals that are not designed with the human body in mind, it's not surprising that all of us are affected and that all our organ systems can be affected in different ways. It's just a matter of timing, level of exposure matters, but it's about all these other factors, what else you're exposed to in your daily life. And what little we know suggests 1,800 chemicals are for sure endocrine disruptors, but less than 5% of synthetic chemicals in our daily lives are tested to date for endocrine disruptors. So there's this tip of an iceberg problem. And what we know the most about are 5 categories of chemicals that are hacking our hormones: pesticides used in agriculture, phthalates used in personal care products, cosmetics, and food packaging, bisphenols used in aluminum can linings and thermal paper receipts, flame retardants used in electronics and furniture, and the brominated flame retardants, the phthalates, the bisphenols, and the pesticides. And then the 5th one was made famous by Mark Ruffalo through this movie Dark Waters, the perfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, used in nonstick cooking and oil and water resistant clothing. So when you rattle off all these uses, you're talking about everyone being exposed. This isn't a 1%er issue. This is a 100%er issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's the overwhelm of this whole thing. You're like, and when you look at, these EDCs in everything from the major food production, vis-a-vis the pesticides and herbicides, and then the clothing that you're putting on, the infamous Gore-Tex that's repelling. Well, how do you think that's repelling? And then the Teflon, which, I don't know. I think it came out, maybe was it in the late 70s, early 80s, something like that, like
Yeah,
the perfect pan.
right.
And you're right.
Not
And we
perfect.
yeah, certainly not perfect. And isn't Teflon, and the PFAS is kind of underneath that whole Teflon group, right? Isn't that one of the most permeated chemicals on the planet in basically everyone's blood at this point, and umbilical cord upon birth? Like, it's crazy, right?
So if I drew your blood and you drew my blood, we'd probably both have detectable levels of multiple PFAS in our bodies. You actually do bring 100 folks in, from 6-year-olds all the way to 99-year-olds, we'd all have it. And the sad reality is these endocrine disrupting chemicals are detectable in nearly all of us. So the phthalates, for example, 95% in national surveys done by Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And these are at levels that are known to be toxic to hormones in our bodies. Pesticides, organophosphate pesticides, same thing. Flame retardants. And the problem is that some of these chemicals stay in the body for years on years. The PFAS are notorious for it because the body doesn't know how to excrete it, or if it tries to excrete it, it reabsorbs it because its body is designed to pick up some of those molecules and take them back. Right. So when those things stay around and they bioaccumulate and they're persistent, that's where there can be a unique set of problems.
Yeah, so that's where, we think about, like, people eating fish, and then they have mercury, and then you can use there's some chelating protocols, you can bring that down and maybe stay away from fish. And this is a whole different thing, right? This is a bioaccumulation. And so what are some of the things, like, so for example, the phthalates are the plasticizers and everything else. So virtually, packaging, and you're wrapping your food, and like your water bottles and all of that stuff. So number one, what can we do to minimize that phthalate exposure, aside from the obvious?
So the great news is that there's safe and simple steps we can walk through to reduce our exposures. You're not going to zero this out right away. That's going to probably require some additional change through our government. But I have a lot of hope because study after study, low-income, high-income populations shows you can reduce your phthalates reliably. And the good news about the phthalates is they don't stay in the body the same length of time. So you can get them out of your body in 2 to 3 days. And then if you keep on doing the right thing and follow these safe and simple steps, you keep your exposures low, and you'll see your hormones get better in the medium term. You'll see your chronic disease risk profile drop over time. So let's renegotiate our relationship with plastic fundamentally. We need to just reduce our use of all types of plastic, in particular. Glass and stainless steel are a great way to go. Particularly if you're machine washing or microwaving plastic, that's a no-no, because these chemicals, like the phthalates, are not covalently bound to plastic. And so they leach relatively easily with heat. Then polymers break down into monomers. That's what a plastic is. A polymer is just this long chain of the same damn molecule all the time. And if you use heat or harsh chemicals, you'll break those bonds, and those chemicals will absorb into foods too. There are also certain recycling numbers to avoid. 3 is for phthalates, which we've talked about already. We can talk a little more about the specifics of the effects. We haven't gone into that as much. 6 is for styrene, a known carcinogen, and 7 are for bisphenol, synthetic estrogens that are known as what we call chemical obesogens, chemicals that literally make us fatter.
Whoa, so we have to pull, people are going to be like, holy shit, what? I've never heard that term in my life. I've been trying to lose weight. What are the obesogens, and how can I stay away from those?
Yeah, so we used to think, calories in, calories out, right? That's the core of maintaining a healthy body weight. And nothing I'm going to say here minimizes the importance of good diet and good physical activity. However, let's take the PFAS as a good example, and we'll come back to phthalates. So, PFAS, in a study of adults who had lost weight through healthy diet and good physical activity, they measured their blood samples for those PFAS, and then they followed the population over time. And the ones that gained their weight back, independent of their diet and physical activity, were the ones with the higher PFAS. And then when they looked further, they asked why. Guess what? Lower resting metabolic rate. So the body's thermostat was turned the wrong way. And so you imagine on a cold day, you're supposed to shiver or burn energy somehow to heat up. That body was saying, no, 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 I need to save my calories as fat. So net, even though they were doing the right thing with their caloric balance, the body was miswired by these chemicals to do the wrong thing.
Wow. And where do you find the majority of the PFASs today that people are? I mean, people are still using those damn pans. Like, we should throw those things away. And I don't even know a safe way to throw those things away, because then we're talking the environmental exposure too. But so that's number one for sure. And where are some of the other exposures that people can eliminate?
So stainless steel and cast iron are really your cookware go-tos. I mean, yeah, sure, it needs a little more elbow grease, means a little more olive oil. Last I checked, olive oil was still good for you in your diet from a heart health perspective, right? And then, we all have this knee-jerk reaction to go buy Gore-Tex or clothing that have PFAS. And the companies have been very reluctant to shift their manufacturing practices. But this is where I have so much hope, because we as consumers have so much power with our wallets and pocketbooks, such that we can drive the change we seek. So you see companies, major clothing manufacturers, starting to say whether their clothing has PFAS or not. I can actually go on various websites now, and that's actually an option. PFAS free is starting to show up. So people are starting to, follow the lead. We had this recently with the brominated flame retardants. They were in all sorts of furniture and electronics from 1970 to about 2013. It was the American way of trying to stop the spread of fires, except it was doing us no good because it didn't delay the spread of fires or save lives. When California changed its law to switch back and not require flame retardants, they required a label notifying when flame retardants were added. And so companies were being asked, what is on your label? And all of a sudden, all the companies shifted over to flame retardant free. Yeah, so that's what gives me so much hope.
Yeah, and it's things like this, like having these conversations and bringing out this information. It's weird to me, Leo, that this even has to happen, right? That you have to write a book like this and do all this, because that's another kind of thing that I have, and I want to get into, because what the hell is flame retardant doing in my television set and my pillow and my mattress and my couches? What the hell is that? And it's but like the lack. I mean, I have strong reactions to what our regulatory bodies are actually freaking doing, because I've read countless things where I'm reading something. It's, for me, PFAS really screamed at me when Oral-B was cited in a research article, and it has PFAS on that Glide, dental floss. And I was like, what? Like, what the hell is that doing in my mouth, right? And it's important to talk about this stuff, to get it out so that people can realize. But my one of my biggest, and that's kind of personally, I just want to know, like, what the hell's going on with? I've seen articles written and they acknowledge, like, the FDA is acknowledged a carcinogenic potential, but then they kick the can oh, it's maybe inconclusive, and they kick the can down the road,
Right.
and they still allow products into our world and into our environment. Like, I know this is a massive topic, but what, who is, aside from EWG or Campaign for Safe Cosmetics or these
Right.
great organizations, why the hell are these other organizations not doing their job? Or, yeah.
So let's take it in pieces. You're
Yeah.
totally right, and I don't blame you getting lathered up over this. So let's unwrap the first part of the onion. Remember at the top I talked about as a medical student being told, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, no problem, right?
Right.
Everything in moderation. Well, that mantra carried its way all the way through toxicologists, epidemiologists, even medical people, such that my colleagues that I work with here at NYU, they didn't get much of this training at all. The Endocrine Society was the first scientific report putting this issue on the map. It's 2009. The World Health Organization only put out its first report in 2012. The Endocrine Society put its second report in 2015. The American Academy of Pediatrics put its report out in 2018. So what I'm saying is that people are catching up. But scientific paradigms take a long time to shift, and that's what's frustrating. And unfortunately, the people in these agencies who've been there for 30 years, they're used to, well, I was trained one way and I'm stuck in it. And so some of this is not intentional industry greenwashing, or worse than greenwashing, right?
Yeah.
Let's face it, there's a lot of money at stake in these companies, and that's why they will fight the science as much as they can. That's the other issue.
Which is a big issue.
It is. And, these diseases that are due to hormones, hormone disrupting chemicals, cost us. Ultimately, we pay. And we're actually footing the bill of other people's profits, because endocrine disrupting chemicals cost the United States $340 billion a year. 2.3% of our gross domestic product goes right out the window because of these chemicals. And that's based on less than 5% of the known EDCs, a subset of diseases due to the few chemicals we studied, and a subset of costs due to the few diseases due to the few chemicals we studied. And yes, 2% of our gross domestic product, we're being taxed by the chemical industry. So those are two big problems underneath the surface here. Is there's a lot of money at stake to changing our ways, but there's also just some basic scientific resistance, and that is going to take some time to work through, but you're seeing the scientific and medical organizations really step up their game, and that's what gives me hope too.
Yeah, it's good to hear that. I mean, I know that I have read a few things in the Endocrine Society. I think what has like 17,000 members, and they're all MDs, scientists, researchers, over 100 countries. So that is power, but it's like the government, quote unquote, agencies, like the slow roll with whether it's conflicts of interest, whether it's naivete, where it's both, where it's these kind of old policies, old kind of procedures, and then muscled by this profit side of things. Whatever it is, people are suffering, and that's the downside of this thing. And more than anyone, let's break this down a little bit in terms of what is actually happening, because it's like children, for example, are so susceptible to all of this stuff. Their immune systems aren't developed. They're getting hit with foreign chemicals from every direction: water, air, food, clothing, binkies, you name it.
Right.
So let's break down, people might be listening here going, yeah, well, what are the symptomologies? What are the problems that seem to show up?
So the first read we had of a problem was kids' brain development. And, you talked about your dad's thyroid gland, and the thyroid gland is a lifelong organ that does so much. So, brain development in babies is crucially related to thyroid hormone. Like, we as pediatricians check the heel stick on a newborn baby at birth to make sure they have a proper functioning of thyroid hormone, because you can replace thyroid hormone and keep the kid from having a lifelong intellectual disability. Well, what we know now is thyroid hormone in pregnancy is crucial for a baby's brain development, because the baby's thyroid hormone doesn't turn on until the second trimester of pregnancy. And even in the clinically normal range, this is stuff an OB can't tell you is a problem. They look at the results, they say, meh, looks good. But pesticides and flame retardants shift thyroid hormone function just a little bit, and those small shifts lead to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism, and cognitive deficits. We've already talked a little bit about obesity, but let's go a little bit further. So these bisphenols that we talked about, aluminum can linings and thermal paper receipts, they make fat cells bigger, they disrupt a protein that protects the heart called adiponectin, and they are synthetic chemical estrogens, so it can have sex-specific effects on body mass. Phthalates change how our body expresses its response to fats and proteins through the expression of certain other proteins in the body. So let's say you've had a good workout, you've had a good keto or protein, whatever your diet of choice is, and you set yourself up for making muscle mass, right? No, phthalates say, we're putting that into fat. And so it just totally perverts the whole notion of what you're trying to do to make a healthy life happen. Then when it comes to heart disease, this is frightening to think about. Phthalates antagonize testosterone. Testosterone is not just crucial for potency and fertility. Low T is a predictor for or marker of adult cardiovascular disease. So we did a study recently that suggested 100,000 US adults die each year because phthalate levels reduce their testosterone function or directly contribute to death from heart disease. So this isn't just a lifestyle matter. This is a life and death matter for folks out there.
So you're saying that the endocrine disrupting compounds are connected now to heart disease, and
yes.
and well, connected to testosterone, low testosterone, which is then connected to heart disease, and then that goes into this whole thing also of like, so I mean, we're talking about the regulation body, all right? We're the regulators of the body, the hormones, the endocrine system. So it's like you have a car and you can't drive it. You can't get anywhere, or you're off-road and you're in a car that's not supposed to be off-road. Like it's just, it derails an infinite amount of things, which is great when you're able to kind of do some studies and figure out some of the things. But it's like, it's got to be impossible to try to understand all of these things, because it makes me think about the neutering of our society, right? The motility of men going down, the pre-menopausal, post-menopausal, prepubescent, like all of like stuff. Like unpack a little of that stuff of what you're seeing.
So we're seeing an acceleration of puberty that could be very problematic, because early puberty is a strong risk factor for breast cancer in young girls. We know that particularly we've seen increases in certain male reproductive birth defects, where the urethra, the opening from the penis, is in the wrong place. And a shortening
that's a direct result of EDCs and stuff?
Unfortunately, yes. We've seen increases in testicular cancer. Now, sure, testicular cancer is much more curable than it was 30 years ago. But unfortunately, we've seen increases, and that's any cancer is scary. We've seen EDCs related directly to breast cancer and other conditions. So prostate cancer has been associated with pesticide exposure among workers. So it's not as though this is, again, just in one organ system. This is something that it's so inconceivable to think that a variety of chemicals could have this broad an effect. But when you're messing with the master signalers, think about a car now these days is so electrical, and that electrical system just gets zonked. You could have things affecting your transmission, your steering, your tires even. That's the way to reason to this, is that you're messing with something just fundamental to basic human functioning.
Yeah, I mean, and it's hard for, some people to understand that, because we're in this reductionism kind of world, right? We want to reduce everything down so that our tiny little brains can try to understand it. Now, there's no fault. We do that all the time, but it's like, if I take this, I will get that. If I do this, I will get that. But in this case, I think the perfect analogy is this car thing. And it's like, if your car's, literally, you squeeze the fuel to the engine, it's not going to work.
Right.
You can stare at the car, you can push it down the street, you can do a lot of these, or the alternator goes out, that's like another great example. So it's like it's a cascade effect. And again, it's like the every turn we make now there's even more and more plastics, and things in like skinny jeans and stretchy pants and formaldehydes and more phthalates, and like, just think of every time there's a squishy plastic, that means there's a lot of phthalates in there really. And then you think about the big horrifying thing where you talked about heat. It's like, you have food you're ordering, you're taking it away, they wrap your hot food in plastic, you drive home, it's been sucking in more and more phthalates, and now you're consuming food with a huge amount of phthalates, like that. And then you're washing your hair, your deodorants, like it's everywhere, man. And it's like, so what, like, how do you, because I know for me, I think every little thing we can do adds up. And so if I take a product, okay, I eliminate that product and I eliminate this one, and I just keep going. And I use my glass bottles. I don't, and if I'm in the airport, because I'd like to not be dehydrated, my weird thing is, as soon as I buy the water bottle, I literally just dump it in my glass. It feels better, even though it probably does nothing other than, but what is your day like personally? And then how can we do our best to avoid some of this stuff? And then what's the big picture, and how can we, because I know I'm going to keep hitting this drum as hard as I can, because again, it's a tobacco style problem, in the sense that it's at least tobacco, you could smell it and see a little bit of it, and this one's even more dangerous. So what do you do to minimize your exposures?
I don't eat canned food, because that comes with bisphenols. The companies are saying they've replaced out the bisphenols, but they haven't shown the data to prove that they're free. Even BPA free is not necessarily bisphenol free. We know of 40 or so artists formerly known as BPA, like BPS, is as estrogenic, as toxic to embryos, and as persistent in the environment.
Right. So they can, so they can take they can say the BPA free BPA, but then there's 40 other ones that they're saying, well, yeah, it's BPA free, but we still need it to be slippery and not the food to stick to it. So we're using this other chemical that's potentially is dangerous.
they can be down with BPZ, if you know what I mean. I'm doing a spin off of another song, but they have BPP, BPAF, the list goes on, and
Right.
the regulatory framework has not adapted. The government hasn't adapted to a framework that protects us the way it should. Saying no to those thermal paper receipts is another way to avoid
Yes.
contact, because that
Yes.
glossy resin is full of these bisphenols that absorb right into you. We've talked a little bit about phthalates from the food perspective, but let's talk about cosmetics and personal care products.
Yeah.
You don't need a PhD in chemistry to read the label. You can look for the letters PHTH, that's the base word of phthalates, but you look for fragrance, you see a problem. Fragrance is a big loophole for a host of chemicals that the industry just can say, it's a trade secret, we won't tell you what's in it, and they could have all sorts of chemicals in it that could be of concern. Eating organic is another step that we can take, and that is known in high income and low income populations to reduce your levels of pesticide. And people say to me, Leo, if you're from a low income community, you can't do that. That's not going to work. You're forcing people to make ends meet in awkward ways. Well, the fact is that we've seen an explosion in market share in organic food, such that the prices of organic food have come down, such that side by side, the big box stores are putting the conventional and organic foods together in similar price points. So we've come a long way. We've already talked about nonstick cooking materials going the wayside for oil, stainless steel or cast iron. And simply opening the window and recirculating the air, this has become much more aware in the era of COVID and ventilation. But there are persistent organic pollutant dusts from electronics and furniture that accumulate on dust in the floor. A wet mop is really good for that, or even carpeting. So just even opening the windows and recirculating the air can enhance the resorption of those products out into the outdoor air.
Yeah. So if you're in a colder climate, it's good for the mitochondria to put yourself under some stress.
That's one way to put it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm from Minnesota, so originally,
Right.
so I know what cold feels like. But so yeah. So I mean, we have to look. Again, I think we're all on this journey. We all have. It's awareness first. Awareness, then we can follow with action, and we can't just change everything right away. But looking at our clothing, looking at our conditioners and our shampoos and this vague fragrance, and that's such a weird thing for me. Like in the supplement world, when I was formulating, it was similar to the flavor industry, and
Right.
I would be screaming at these people, like, you keep giving me stuff with these flow agents and these chemicals. I just told you I don't want them. Yeah, but it's in this other category. I said, I don't care. Like, it's such a strange world that they get this get out of jail free, and it's lazy, right? It's
Yep.
lazy that all of these things. So the accumulation is a big deal. So these what do you think are the most, if people were to take away the top things to do right now to stay away from endocrine disruptors, to help change their life? Because we're talking about people getting exposed multiple times a day, every day, times a day, times a week, times a month, times a year, times 10,
Right.
20, 30. Like, it's bad, right? And so what do you think right now to definitely top 3 things to do right now to minimize your exposure to EDCs?
Reduce your use of plastic.
Period.
Avoid
Yeah.
canned food consumption.
Yeah.
And eating organic. Those are immediately. I mean, cookware is not that hard either.
Yeah.
But those are quick 3.
Yeah, that's it. And I think and talking about the food for a second, I mean, the more locally we can get that food, the more, hey, we can put some seeds in the ground. I know that you can sprout broccoli seeds, garbanzo beans. You can buy sprouting seeds, and literally in your kitchen sink, in a week, you can have some of the most nutrient dense food in the world for 20 cents. So there is things, it's like once we become aware, we will find a way for the things that we care about. So the point here is we need to become aware of the work that you've done and this invisible world that unfortunately is not being regulated at a rate and a speed that's required, and we're being affected by it. And maybe some of the mysteries, right? Some of the mysteries that people are suffering from, maybe this is it. Because, you know, if I can't lose weight and I have attention deficit disorder, or my child's suffering, or I have mood disorders, like this could be part of the issue.
And the fact is that, you know, a lot of people come to me saying, well, I already have this, so I don't have to worry about it. I'm already, you know, stuck with my problem. But the fact is, we know that the trajectory of certain chronic diseases is mediated or explained by changes in hormones. So there are short, medium, and long-term benefits wherever you are on your journey. And everyone is affected. You know, we talk about kids being the most vulnerable, but we talk about prostate cancer and breast cancer. We're talking about adult obesity, adult diabetes. So us adults who've had a number of years of being exposed to these chemicals, I'm a kid of the 70s. I probably was exposed to a bunch of these for a long time. I'm still doing what I need to do because I'm thinking about the future and thinking about what I can do to have a healthier life going forward. So it's not looking backward, it's looking forward.
Right. And the body's resilient, right?
Yes.
You know, and so if we make these changes, and again, we emphasizing the dose response here. So if we minimize these small doses over time, it can have profound, because think about it, everyone listening is lived their life at least 2 decades, right? And so, man, and we know how fast time goes by. And it's also a great thing to integrate. Like integration with knowledge is wonderful because you're like, hey, man, I feel better about brushing my teeth like this and using this better shampoo and more products. To your point, you know, the population and the choices are now expanding as a result of awareness. And so that's encouraging that there's more choices available that don't have some of these, you know, experimental issues. And so what are you yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that, and people focused on climate change these days, right? The fact is that endocrine disrupting climate change and climate change have this common origin: fossil fuel production and consumption. Many of the feedstocks for plastic and for these endocrine disrupting chemicals are from fossil fuels. Ultimately, they're from methane, ethane, etc. So there are co-benefits to cooling the planet and reducing your chemical load. We definitely need to address both. I mean, I argue openly that endocrine disruption is possibly the second greatest public health challenge of our time, because if we cool the planet and we don't address this, we're going to be able to live on the planet, but we won't be able to enjoy the planet because we'll be sicker.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that you just made that connection, because it's like, you know, we talk about the plastics as it relates to the horrific pollution on this planet. Well, that's also neutering our waterways, our streams, our rivers, our oceans and stuff like that. So they're endocrine disrupting the environment. So the less and less we buy, the less and less exposure we have, and the less and less pollution that it's actually having on the planet. And you know, if 8 billion of us changed and our daily habits changed, that's trillions and trillions of bottles of this and bottles of that and go away, or at least slowly go away over time.
And that's what gives me the biggest hope, is that we've finally become woke to this notion that the environment can challenge our sustainability on this planet as a species.
Yeah.
And I hate, you know, doesn't have to be gloom and doom. There are a lot of these safe and simple steps we can all take. You don't have to do everything at once. You build one thing at a time on those safe and simple steps, and you can see the short, medium, and long-term benefits of reducing exposure.
Yeah, amazing. Hey, so what are you working on right now? What's on the top of your focus right now?
Well, a lot of what I do these days is documenting not just what these chemicals do to people and individuals, but a lot of what I've devoted my career to is, I've got health policy background. So it's really trying to translate what we know. Because, yes, I'm going to tell you to do what you can do now and don't worry about the policy framework. But I'm in it to focus on that policy framework because that's going to help us get the job done.
Mhm.
So we've in Europe seen this huge change in policy such that we don't necessarily regulate based on how much of something is bad enough to hurt you. If they find something in Europe that disrupts hormones, bam, it's banned
Wow.
for biocides and pesticides in particular. And we've come a long way in that respect. So a lot of the case I'm making all the time is saying to policymakers, okay, you don't do anything, this is going to cost your taxpayers.
Mhm.
And your taxpayers are going to be pissed
Yeah.
because they pay ultimately as a result of these exposures.
Well, that's got to help you. At least someone's making those changes at a more rapid pace, and then you can use the data and the actionable things that the Europe and the EU is doing, and put more pressure, hopefully, on the US and bring out that information. So just, dude, keep me in the loop. I love to continue to push this as much as possible because it's an experiment that we don't have to do, we don't have to suffer from, but we are.
Right.
And but again, like with anything, with any issue, whether it's your personal issues or bigger issues, you got to face it. We have to
Right.
turn and face it and look at it, or else this biological chemistry set that we get to use is dealing with it.
Right.
So if you don't want to do it in your head, your body, your children, your family is being affected by it. So I'm a big fan of knowledge. Turn into it. Let's face it. Listen. I think that big business, there's great people. You and I have both met great people in big companies who are
Yeah.
wanting to do the right thing. So it's more and more of that we come together, support, and just like what we experienced in the research that was shown at the Footprint conference, the consumers have a level of stress from lack of choice on some of these products. So when you ask them, yeah, man, I don't want to buy this plastic bottle, but I need to because I don't have another choice. And
Right.
so consumers want it. So it's really about, like, listen, big business, this will behoove you all the way down to the numbers and the volumes and the profits you get because customers can get behind that. So I have faith in that as well.
Yeah, if the big companies don't change their ways, they're going to lose out. And we're already seeing that in some of
Yeah.
the companies that are doing the right thing. It took a study of just 5 buffet-style food packages to get PFAS out of buffet packages in 2 major supermarket chains.
Mm.
5. That's not a
Wow.
study I would publish in a scientific peer-reviewed journal, but boy, that had a whole lot more impact than things that are gaining uh, dust on my cabinet back there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know, uh, that's what this is ultimately about. It's not just about doing science to have things on a poster or a wall or whatever that I published. It's about doing the right thing and seeing the change in people and improving their
Mhm.
lives. That's what this is about.
Amen, man. I love that. Well, again, it's such a pleasure, Dr. Leo. Thank you for this time. We're going to have many conversations like this, and keep me in the loop, dude. I'm happy to help in any way that I can, and just keep doing your work because it's definitely needed. And I'm grateful for your work.
Always a pleasure, Darin. Love talking to you anytime and hoping to connect back up with you in person soon.